know, when I first started my food photography career, I literally plucked a number out of the air without doing any calculations when I was asked what my rates were. Now, 13 years in, I have a 6-figure food photography business, so I know a thing or two when it comes to pricing. And in today's video, I'm going to be sharing the biggest pricing mistakes I made, and I lost a lot of money because of that. And I'm sharing these with you so that you don't do the same. Let's go. Okay, the first mistake I made when I started pricing my food photography was to actually ask fellow food photographers and food bloggers what they were charging. Now, when you're just starting out in food photography and you don't have any idea what the general rate is, it's kind of good to know what other people are charging. But you need to bear in mind a few things. My charges are going to be very different from what your charges are based on a number of things. What country I live in, how much experience I have, what my expenses are, what the quality of my skills and creativity are, how saturated is my market. So let's break these down one by one to understand why asking another food photographer what their charges are might not be the best way to price your work. Now, if I live in the USA, what I would charge for my food photography would be very different than if I lived in, say, Iceland. And the reason for that is that the food photography market is a lot more mature in the USA. The buying power is much higher, and in general, there's a lot more food photography work to go around and more brands to work with than, say, in a country like Iceland. So really, if I'm asking somebody on Instagram what they charge, and they live in Iceland, then the likelihood is that their rates will vary enormously from what I could potentially charge in USA. Now, it's a different thing if that person is in the same country as you, because then you can get a rough idea of what the market charges are. So bear that in mind when you're asking another food photographer in a completely different country what they charge. Now, again, let's go into a few of the other reasons to see why it's still not a good idea, even if the photographer you're asking is living in the same country as you. And one of the reasons is experience. Now, I've been working in the industry for the last 13 years. So I'd say I have quite a bit of experience in somebody who's just starting out. The likelihood is that it's going to take me a lot less time to get that money shot than somebody who started a year ago. I also have experience working with top brands such as Subway, Crate & Barrel, Cafe Nero, the Four Seasons, where somebody who's just started a year or two might not have that same client list as I do. So this is to say that somebody who has more experience can likely charge a lot higher than somebody who's just getting started in the industry. So there's really no point in me asking somebody who's just started out because their rates are going to be drastically different and probably lower than what I can expect to charge based on the number of years I've been working. Now, another reason that you shouldn't be asking somebody else what their charges are is because your rates are dependent on what your revenue goals are minus your expenses. And everybody's revenue goals and everybody's expenses are going to be different. Now, let's go back to that first example. Somebody living in Iceland probably has much higher expenses due to the cost of living there. So in order to achieve their revenue goals, they're probably going to have to price their work a lot higher than somebody who's living with their parents in the USA, because the living expenses there are going to be much cheaper. So that's another reason why you shouldn't really be asking the next food photographer or blogger what their charges are. Another reason could be the quality of your skills. Now let's have a look at these two images. Now this first photo I took when I was first starting out in 2009. And then this next image is one I took more recently for a client. Now, there's a drastic difference in the quality of my lighting, my composition, as well as my editing. Now, even though I was paid for both the jobs, you can probably guess that I was paid a lot more for this image than I was for this image. So as my skill levels got better, my creativity got better, I was able to charge more. So asking another photographer what their charges are really doesn't make any sense because they might not be at the same creativity and skill level as you. Now, another reason why you shouldn't be asking another photographer how much they charge and using that as a gauge when it comes to your own pricing is due to market saturation and the number of photographers that are available to do the work. Now, this has all got to do with supply and demand. If the demand for food photographers is much higher than the supply, so there's a lot more food photography work, then the likelihood is you can charge a lot more. Now, in the reverse scenario, if there are tons and tons of food photographers, and especially if they're all really good at their jobs as well, but there isn't much demand for food photography, then you can't charge as much for your work. And that's why it's really irrelevant to ask another photographer what they're charging, because you don't know what the supply and demand is for that particular photographer and in their area. Okay, so enough about mistake number 1, which was asking other food photographers and bloggers what they're charging. The second big mistake when it comes to pricing your food photography is charging a day rate and not specifying deliverables. So let's unpack this a little. I generally don't have a problem with somebody charging a day rate. And in fact, for some of my own clients, especially restaurant photography clients, I actually have a day rate that I charge instead of a bespoke quotation. Now, the issue arises when you don't specify the deliverables. So how many recipes or how many shots you'll be taking in that day, or the final number of images you'll be supplying the client. Now, the problem with this is because they're paying you per day, they might be expecting you to shoot their entire menu, which could be hundreds upon hundreds of shots. You might be put into a situation where the food is coming out like on a conveyor belt, and you're expected to get the shot within 2 or 3 minutes before the next dish is presented. And this is really not going to serve you or your client. You're going to end up being stressed. You're not going to be able to do your best work because you won't have any time when it comes to each dish. And the likelihood is that the shots you're going to be taking will be below par, but also the client's going to be unhappy. So it's really a lose-lose situation here. And that's why when you do quote day rates, while it's not my favorite way to quote, you really must specify the number of deliverables so that you're actually managing your client's expectations and you're still able to deliver your best work without putting so much pressure on yourself. Okay, on to the next mistake that I made when it came to pricing my work early on, and that was not taking into account the time it took before a shoot as well as after a shoot working for that particular client. So in the beginning of my career, whilst negotiating with clients and pricing and quotations, I'd get a brief and then I'd calculate how long it would take me to shoot the deliverables that were in the brief. What I wouldn't take into account was the time that I spent before the shoot date doing things such as hiring equipment, maybe driving to the store to get this equipment, creating mood boards, or perhaps spending time packing props or sourcing props. Or what about the time taken in post-production, such as the time taken to edit images, to cull images, to send images to a client? So I found that overall I was working a lot more hours than what I had quoted for in the project, which generally included just the day of the shoot. So just make sure that whenever you're sending your quotations and your proposals, you're actually accounting for time spent in pre-production as well as post-production. Now, I have a few more mistakes that I want to go over with you, but before I do that, I wanted to tell you about my free masterclass all about building a highly successful food photography business. Now, if you really want to level up your food photography and stand out in a saturated market, as well as actually get paid for your food photography without having thousands of followers on Instagram, without having a ton of experience, then make sure you're signed up for my free masterclass, where I've helped hundreds of students get results like shooting a cookbook, getting booked out with food photography work, as well as raising their rates to nearly $2,000 a day. Now, if those are the kind of results you're looking for, then make sure you're registered by clicking the link in the description box below. Okay, on to the next pricing mistake that I made early on in my career that I see so many food photographers making till today is not charging licensing fees. Okay, so quickly, what are licensing fees? Now, when you take a photo, you basically own the right to that photo. And as soon as you give it to a client, you can then think of it as renting it out to them. So a bit like a house. When you rent a house from a landlord, you've got to pay them rent. And that rent will be dependent on how long you live in that house. And just like that, when you give a client images, they've got to pay rent based on how long they're going to be using those images, as well as where they're going to use it amongst a whole load of other things. And really, it's licensing where you can make a generous proportion of your food photography revenue. But right at the beginning of my career, I didn't even know what licensing fees were. So I lost a huge chunk of money by not charging my clients licensing fees. And even when I did start charging clients, I wasn't actually pricing my licensing fees correctly. And that's one of the reasons I've dedicated a whole module on how to accurately charge licensing fees in my paid program, Food Photography Bootcamp. So that way my students aren't losing out on chunks and chunks of money like I did early on in my career. Okay, on to the next mistake when it comes to pricing, and that's not raising your rates. Okay, so here's the issue with this. The cost of living and the cost of general life expenses are going up year by year. And this is based on inflation rate. So as an example, let's say you make $50,000 in revenue in your food photography business. And then your expenses are $10,000. Now, in year 2, if you keep your rates exactly the same, but now your expenses have increased to say $15,000, you're going to make a lot less profit unless you either work with more clients or you increase your rates. I think it's really difficult as a freelancer and as a creative to actually raise our rates because we worry that previous clients will get upset, we'll lose those clients won't want to work with us, and as a result, we're not going to make any money. But you really need to get over your mindset issues around money, charging for your time, because you're no longer doing this as a hobby, it's an actual business. And businesses need to make money to stay afloat. So my suggestion would be to ensure that you're raising your rates at the beginning of each year by a certain percentage, as well as checking your rates midway through the year. Now, another pro tip here is before I raise my rates, I always send out a blast email to my previous clients, telling them that I'm going to do this and that if they want to book me before I raise my rates, I also send them a calendar link. That way, it's not going to come as a shock to your clients and they'll get a chance to book you at your old rates. Now, speaking of clients, if you're finding that you're even struggling to book and find clients to send out quotations to, then I really want you to check out this video I made on how to get more food photography clients. I'm breaking down the top ways I've managed to book out my calendar with some of my dream clients, such as Four Seasons, Nespresso, Cinnabon, as well as KFC. So just click over here and have a look. Make sure you also subscribe to my channel because I'm going to be back next week with a brand new video that's going to help you not only take better food photos, but also monetize your food photography and get paid. See you then.